The storyteller says, "My name is Jack, and I spent half my life in the woods, hunting everything that walks on four legs." To me, the stories old men tell around campfires about Bigfoot are nothing but myths to sell t-shirts to foolish tourists. But on that October morning, I decided to put an end to this nonsense. I packed my Winchester rifle and headed toward the Valley of Silence in the Cascade Mountains, an area avoided by even the most experienced hunters. I entered the forest as fog wrapped around the trees like a grey shroud. The trees there were giant and ancient, as if they possessed eyes watching every stranger. There was no sound of birds or squirrels, only a funereal silence that made you hear your own heartbeat. After hours of walking, I began to notice illogical things. Massive tree trunks were snapped in the middle, not by wind, but by brute force, as if something had passed through here in a rage. I said to myself with a sarcastic smile, "A large grizzly bear, nothing more." But that smile soon froze when I found the first print. In the mud of the riverbank, I saw a footprint. It wasn't a bear's, and it wasn't a human's. It was nearly the length of my arm, with 5 distinct toes, and its depth in the ground suggested its owner weighed at least half a ton. I took out my camera to photograph the evidence that would mock the world, and suddenly I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I was not alone. The forest, which had been silent moments ago, began to breathe. I heard a distant sound, not a roar, but a sharp, metallic screech that tore through the mountain silence. It was a cry that didn't belong to any animal I knew. It carried a tone of defiance, as if the forest was telling me I had crossed the line. I began setting up my small camp as the sun set, placing thermal surveillance cameras around the perimeter. I was confident in my rifle, but deep in my eyes, there was a fear I hadn't admitted to myself. As darkness fell, the true horror began. Massive stones began falling on my tent from an unknown location, stones thrown with terrifying precision. I looked through the thermal monitor and saw a massive heat signature standing behind a pine tree 50 meters away. The mass was taller than the tree itself. Suddenly, the mass moved with lightning speed, faster than any biological being, and disappeared from the screen. At that moment, the power to all the cameras was cut with a single blow. I stepped out of the tent with my rifle aimed forward, my spotlight scanning the darkness. Suddenly, just a few meters away, I saw 2 eyes, large eyes, glowing with a phosphoric yellow color amidst the thick fur. It didn't attack me, it merely emitted a low growl that made the ground beneath my feet vibrate. I realized then that I hadn't come to hunt. I had come to offer myself as a feast for the master of this place. I backed away slowly, but I tripped over something solid. When I aimed the light downward, I found the wreckage of my cameras. They had been completely crushed under a massive foot. Suddenly, total darkness prevailed after my spotlight was shattered by a mysterious strike. The forest was no longer my place, and I was no longer the hunter. I was now just a small creature trying to survive a night that would never end. Darkness in the Cascade Mountains is not merely an absence of light, it is an entity that swallows you. After my spotlight was shattered, I froze in place for minutes, my hand gripping the Winchester rifle, so hard my knuckles turned white. I could hear nothing but my racing breath and a strange, whistling sound coming from the tops of the giant trees. I pulled a single match from my hunting vest and lit it carefully. What I saw made my limbs tremble. My tent, which had been right behind me, had been crushed and turned into a piece of shredded cloth in seconds, without me feeling any movement. I didn't wait. I ran toward the rocky slope where I knew there was a small cave that might protect my back from attacks. As I ran, I began to hear footfalls behind me, but they weren't the steps of a four-legged animal. They were heavy thuds that made the earth shake, as if a massive boulder was falling and rising with every step. I turned and fired a random shot into the dark, followed by an angry scream that shook the forest to its core. A sound that wasn't a roar, but a distorted human scream, amplified 1,000 times. I reached the cave and quickly started a small fire using emergency fuel. I sat in the corner, my rifle aimed at the entrance. Suddenly, an eerie silence prevailed. Then, the psychological games began. From the pitch-black darkness outside the cave, I heard a voice that made my hair stand on end. A voice calling out, "Jack, are you there?" It was my own voice. It was mimicking the tone of my voice recorded by the surveillance cameras before they were smashed. This creature does not only possess terrifying muscles, it possesses a demonic intelligence that allows it to analyze its victims' voices. I didn't answer. I gripped my rifle tighter. Suddenly, a massive stone the size of a human head flew into the cave, slamming into the wall just centimeters from my head. Then, the pack began to appear. It wasn't just one. I saw 3 massive shadows moving around the cave opening. They were striking the trees with pieces of rock rhythmically, as if playing my personal death symphony. I realized then that they didn't want to kill me immediately. They were testing my patience, wanting me to drain my ammunition into the void. I lost my nerves when I saw a massive hand covered in dark red hair reach from the edge of the cave to steal my food bag. I fired directly. This time, I was sure I hit the target. I heard a muffled groan and saw dark blood staining the cave floor, but instead of fleeing, their rage increased. The leader, the largest of them all, began to emerge slowly under the dim firelight. He stood over 3 meters tall, his chest muscles looking as if they were carved from mountain rock, and his yellow eyes looked at me not as a hungry animal, but as an opponent insulted by a trivial intruder. He opened his mouth to reveal massive fangs and emitted a roar that caused the fire in the cave to blow out from the sheer air pressure. At that moment, I threw a flare I had in my pocket toward his face. The scream he let out when the white light hit him was enough to paralyze me for seconds. I seized the chance and ran with all my might toward the slope leading to the waterfall. I knew that water was my only way to hide my scent and trail. Behind me, the sound of trees snapping suggested a hurricane was chasing me. They were leaping between rocks with a terrifying agility that didn't match their size. I reached the edge of the waterfall, looked back, and saw the leader standing on a high rock, raising his hands to the sky and letting out a cry that echoed throughout the Cascades. It was the signal for the final attack. I had no choice, either death at the hands of these monsters or jumping into the unknown of the raging waters. I closed my eyes and jumped, and in my ears echoed a distorted human laugh released by that entity as it watched its prey fall. My body hit the waterfall's water as if hitting a concrete wall. The cold paralyzed my nerves instantly, but the adrenaline was screaming in my mind, "Move or die." The current dragged me for nearly a kilometer before I managed to cling to a tree trunk lying on the bank. I emerged, trembling, my body covered in bruises, and my rifle, good God, the rifle was still with me, hanging by its leather strap around my shoulder, but the magazine was nearly empty. Only 3 bullets remained. I looked at the sky. The black clouds foretold a storm the mountains had never witnessed before. I realized I wouldn't be able to escape these creatures by running. They are faster, stronger, and know every inch of this land. If I wanted to get out alive, I had to make them play my game. I began moving towards the abandoned old mines area, where the ground is narrow and the paths are filled with metallic debris. There, I would set my final trap. As I walked, I felt them. They weren't hiding themselves this time. They were walking among the trees parallel to me, striking the trunks with force, as if beating war drums. The leader was in the front. I saw his massive shadow leaping over high rocks, watching me with eyes radiating malice. I reached the mine and began working immediately. I used old barbed wire, rusty fuel cans left on site, and rigged them to my rifle's firing mechanism. I created an acoustic and light ambush that relied on amplifying the echo inside the mine tunnels. Suddenly, everything stopped, and absolute silence prevailed, so deep that I heard the raindrops hitting my clothes. Then came the cry. The leader was no longer mimicking my voice. He let out a roar that shook the mine walls. He appeared at the tunnel entrance, standing on his hind legs, completely blocking the moonlight with his massive frame. I fired the first bullet, not to kill him, but to ignite a fuel can I had placed right behind him. The explosion didn't kill him, but it trapped him in flames, preventing him from retreating or calling for his pack. The beast lunged at me through the fire in a blind rage. He was faster than I imagined. His first blow shattered a stone wall beside my shoulder, and I felt the force of the wind generated by his hand. I used the barbed wire I had set. His massive feet tripped, and he fell with all his weight to the ground. At that moment, I aimed the second bullet at an old metal chandelier hanging from the mine's ceiling. The massive iron mass fell onto his back, and I heard the sound of bones breaking, like nothing I had ever heard in my life. The creature roared in pain, trying to rise despite his severe injuries. I approached him. The distance between us was no more than 2 meters. I saw his face clearly under the firelight. He wasn't a monster in the traditional sense. He was a piece of nature, ancient, mysterious, and powerful. He looked at me, and I didn't see fear in his eyes, but a final defiance. I raised my rifle and put the third and last bullet in the chamber. I whispered to him, "Myths don't die, my friend, but they stop the hunt." I pulled the trigger. I emerged from the mine nearly breathless. Behind me, the rest of the pack began to wail, a sad, funeral-like wail for the loss of their leader. They didn't chase me. It was as if there were an unwritten law in the forest. He who kills the leader is left to depart with his honor. I reached my car with the first light of dawn, my clothes torn, my body exhausted, and my soul forever changed. I drove away, and when I looked in the rearview mirror toward the mist-covered peaks of the Cascade Mountains, I swear I saw a massive shadow standing on the highest rock, raising a hand in farewell, or perhaps promising a future encounter. The world won't believe my story, but now I know the truth. We are not the masters of this earth. We are merely unwelcome guests in the kingdom of Bigfoot.